start off my presentation, I want to talk about the background information of the Gambino family. So the Gambino family is considered pretty much the most publicized family of the American Mafia history. It's one of the 5 families out of New York, and a name originates from one of its former bosses, Carlo Gambino, who controlled the family from 1959 until 1976 when he died of a heart attack. As we have learned in this class, pretty much every organized crime society has had a specific structure, and this is the same for the Gambino family. Each of the 5 families had the same basic structure. So you have the boss at the top who controls the family and makes executive decisions, and then you're going to have the underboss underneath him who's going to be second in command. He reports directly to the boss and no one else. You have the concierge, who is a senior advisor. He's pretty much the same level as the underboss. He's a skilled counselor, and he pretty much advises the family on what he thinks they should do. He reports directly to the boss as well. And then you have capos. Capos were captains of various divisions of the family, and they manage crews of soldiers. And then you reach the lowest level, it's the soldier, which are the soldiers. They held the lowest position of the family, and they followed orders of the capos or the underboss. And then you also have associates. Associates weren't necessarily a part of the family, but they might have been involved in what they were doing. They partnered with the family. And that's the basic structure of the Gambino family. Next, I want to talk about the early history of the Gambino family, how it kind of all got formed and got started. So you have the first character, and that's going to be Salvatore Toto de Acquia. He formed alliances with other bosses, and he took down weaker gangs. He also absorbed all their businesses. He helped establish the largest Italian gang in New York from the years 1910 through 1917. In 1928, he was gunned down by Joe the Boss Masira, who happened to be his rival. And then in 1930, 2 years after that, Masira killed Acquia's second in command and his lieutenant. The following year, in 1931, Masira ended up getting killed, and Salvatore Maranzano took over as the boss of bosses in New York. He then divided the New York gang into 5 families, and he pretty much proclaimed himself as the top spot. So this is how you come into the whole 5 families of New York. It started right here when Maranzano took over the gang, and he decided he was going to separate it into 5 families. 5 months later, Lucky Luciano had Maranzano killed, and then Lucky Luciano took over, and he then built further on what Maranzano had already created. So he's the one who created the commission, and so each boss of the 5 families would have a seat on the commission, and that's how they would deliberate and negotiate and avoid having gang wars throughout the city. Continuing on early history, in 1951, Vincent Mangano became the boss, but he was killed just a few months after that. And so Albert Anastasia was made the new boss, and his second in command was Carlo Gambino. Albert Anastasia had made a lot of questionable decisions that the commission didn't support, so the commission actually conspired against him. And in 1957, Anastasia was gunned down while he was at the barbershop getting a haircut, and they placed Gambino as the new boss of the family. Gambino changed the name of the gang to the Gambino family, and it's remained the Gambino family ever since. So with Anastasia out of the picture and Gambino now as the new head of the family, we were brought into the Gambino era of the Gambino family. So Carlo Gambino started working with Meyer Lansky, and they started operating a lot of gambling enterprises in Cuba. He established a lot of offshore gaming houses in Cuba and the Bahamas. Gambino also gained a lot of influence over the construction industry. The family gained control of the Teamsters local union, which was a labor union who had access to building materials in the New York area. Pretty much they had so much power over this union that the family could bring any type of construction job, they could get it to a halt if they wanted to, just to make a point. He ran the family until 1976 when he passed away. He generated a lot of money for the family, and this is pretty much how the Gambino family became the powerhouse of the five families that it was at the time. With Gambino passing away from a heart attack, we now enter the Castellano era. So the family was passed down to Gambino's brother-in-law, Paul Castellano. He kept Gambino second in command, Anello della Croce as second in command for him. His idea for business was getting involved in white-collar crimes such as stock embezzlement. He also expanded the family's influence in the construction industry. He did this by making an alliance with the Irish American West Side Gang, and so the two groups made money from construction rackets. Well, the family was making large amounts of money, but that meant they were getting a lot of attention from the federal government, and so they soon faced federal indictments in 1985. Castellano also began receiving a lot of criticism from the family about the way he was running it, and a lot of criticism came from John Gotti, who would actually become a boss of the Gambino family in the coming years. In December of 1985, Castellano was gunned down, and so his time as boss was over, and John Gotti would actually replace him as the new boss. So now enters John Gotti as boss of the Gambino family. His nickname was the Dapper Don because he was always dressed in really expensive hand-tailored suits and he always had silk ties. He actually did not hide his mob connection. He actually kind of lived the life of like a really famous person. His picture and stories about him were constantly in like tabloid newspapers. He faced federal and state trial 3 times, but he was acquitted all 3 times. It actually took the FBI decided to bug his apartment, an apartment in which he would hold meetings. And in one of those meetings, he actually said some things about one of the members of the family named Sammy Gravano. So the FBI played the tapes for Sammy Gravano, and so he agreed to testify against Gotti and the family. And so this is how John Gotti eventually got sentenced to life without parole on April 2nd, 1992. In the years following John Gotti's arrest, the family actually struggled for quite a while. John Gotti tried to rule the family from prison. Eventually his son, John Gotti Jr., took over as head of the family, but he was forced to plead guilty to a racketeering charge in 1999 and was sentenced to 77 months in jail. John Gotti Sr. ended up dying in prison in 2002. Peter Gotti took over as boss, but he was sent to jail in 2003. And then on top of a number of members getting sent to jail, Michael DiLeonardo, who was the former head of white-collar operations for the family, he was facing some charges, but he agreed to testify against members of all 5 families, including the Gambino family, in order to protect himself, and then he disappeared into witness protection. So the family faced a lot of problems in surrounding leadership roles, and people pretty much turning on the family and testifying against them after Gotti was jailed and eventually died in prison. The Gambino family is still operating today. A big way that they still earn money is through traditional rackets such as illegal gambling and extortion. They still have ties to the construction industry and they still have ties to several different unions. In February 8th, 2008, 87 people involved with the Gambino crime family were charged and arrested. The FBI was going after cadre of middle managers and lower level figures. Also, a few union and construction officials were charged as well. In 2013, Francisco Kelly replaced 76-year-old Dom Cefalu as the boss of the Gambino family. So with that, he became the boss of the nation's biggest mob family. So even today in 2016, the family is still relevant. They may not make headlines like they did in the years past, but clearly the family is still influential. They still have control over several different enterprises in New York City, and they're still making money. So, I mean, they adapt with the times just like any criminal organization. I've come up with 3 questions that I think someone might ask after hearing this presentation. The first one is, what were some of Gambino's accomplishments as head of the Gambino family? And with that, I'm referring to Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino pretty much put the Gambino family on the map. He expanded the rackets of the family. Gambino rackets were created in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Las Vegas. So he took the business of the Gambino family from just New York and he expanded it across the United States. He also took over the New York Longshoremen Union. This union controlled 90% of New York City's ports. So if Gambino was in charge of this union, basically he controlled 90% of New York City's ports. His family policy was deal and die. He was really adamant about not getting involved in the drug business. And so if he found out that someone in the family was dealing drugs and making money off of that, it would be sentenced to death. The second question is, what is the most interesting story about one of the Gambino family members? After doing research on the family, I found out that in 1975, Paul Castellano ordered the murder of Vito Borelli. This happened to be his daughter's boyfriend. Vito had reportedly been making fun of Paul Castellano, and he compared him to Frank Perdue, who happened to be the commercial spokesman for Perdue Farms in their commercials. And so Castellano was offended by this and took great offense to this, and so he had his daughter's boyfriend murdered. How much money was the family making in their prime? When John Gotti took over as boss, it was estimated that the family was making roughly $500 million annually. And on top of that, John Gotti was probably making around 10 to 12 million a year. So this was what put them at the top. They were considered America's most powerful mafia family. And so that's my presentation on the Gambino family. Thank you.